I got home on a Saturday, the 24th of August. He was living a nice, pleasant, peaceful life in California, and had a first-class law firm, good group of clients. Wife had a good job there, and I told him I was in a mess and there wasn't any second choice. And 3 days later, he was back in New York and living in a small apartment in Battery City, and handling the general counsel's job at Solomon. They found John McFarlane on that Sunday on the 18th. I think he was running in a triathlon or something. Not a practice that Charlie and I follow, but and he was yanked from that and came down. And I think John lives over in New Jersey, but he holed up in the downtown athletic club, and it was his job to keep funding what was then a $150 billion balance sheet during a period when people right and left were canceling us, not because we weren't a good credit, but because they just didn't want to have anything to do with us for a while. And the World Bank and the State of Texas Pension Fund and CalPERS, all these people were shutting off funding at a time, and funding in a business, as the gentleman just indicated, is the lifeblood of an enterprise like Solomon. And so those three deserve an enormous hand, really by the Solomon shareholders, but by this group in turn, because we have an important investment in. So I thank them publicly. Zone 2.
I'm Kelly Ranson from San Antonio, Texas, and I wondered if you could comment on the mutual savings and loan. There was just a footnote that the deposits had been assumed by a federal savings bank. And also, what about the annual report for Wesco Financial that I know it used to be in the annual report for Berkshire? Just wondered if you could comment on that, please.
The question is about our 80% owned subsidiary, Wesco Financial, sold its ownership in Mutual Savings and Loan of Pasadena last year. I'll let Charlie comment on that. And then the second question is about the Wesco report, which is available to any Berkshire shareholder simply by writing Wesco. But we found that stapling problems and other things made it a little difficult to keep adding that every year to the report. So now we make it available to anyone who would in Berkshire who would like to have it. But Charlie, you want to comment on the sale of Mutual?
Yes, the savings and loan business became very much more heavily regulated after the huge nationwide collection of scandal and insolvency and so on. And meanwhile, we had a very small savings and loan association, and the combination of the new regulation and the fact that it was a very small part of our operation made us decide that we were better off without it. That does happen from time to time in Berkshire. We do exit once in a while. And by the way, we would reserve the right to change our mind. I always liked Lord Keynes when he said that he got new facts or new insights, well, he changed his mind, and then he'd say, "What do you do?" So we changed our mind.
They asked our directors at Mutual to start going to school on Saturday, didn't they, Charlie, or something? I think that helped change our mind about Mutual.
Yeah, there's a time to vote with your feet.
And even your wallet. Yeah. Zone 3.
Chicago. Can you speak to some of the economic characteristics of the shoe industry that allowed the business to be profitable and, in your view, attractive?
I didn't hear that. Did you hear that, John?
He wanted you to comment on the merits of the shoe industry.
Well, I think our feelings for the shoe industry are very clear from what's been happening the last few years. we think it's a great business to be in as long as you're in with Frank Rooney and Jim Isler and Peter Lunder and Harold Alford. Otherwise, it hasn't been too good. We have a couple of extraordinary shoe operations, but they're not extraordinary because we get our leather from different steers or anything of the sort. We have two companies, really three now that Lowell's been brought in too, but that have truly extraordinary records. I think those same managements would have been enormous successes in any business they'd gone into, but they have gone into they are in the shoe business, and the companies earn unusual returns on equity. They earn unusual returns on sales. They've got terrific trade reputations. And I think that to the extent we can find ways to expand in the shoe business while employing those managements, we'll be very excited about doing so. It isn't because we think that the shoe industry is any cinch, per se, or anything of the sort, but we've got a lot of talent employed in the shoe business, and whenever we've got talent, we like to try and figure out a way to give them as big a domain as we can. And it's not inconceivable that we would expand the shoe business, perhaps even significantly over time. Zone 4.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Buffett. My name is Stuart Hartman from Sioux City. After the brevity of the last question from Section 4, I'll try to be extremely brief. Given the scrutiny that the tobacco business is going under right now, number one, what do you see as the business prospects for those huge cash cows, and at any point would that be attractive to you given their liability?
Questions about the future of the tobacco business? I probably know more about that than you do because it's fraught with questions that relate to societal attitudes, and you can form an opinion on that just as well as I could. But I would not like to have a significant percentage of my net worth in the tobacco business myself. But they may have better futures than I envision. I don't really think that I have special insights on that. Charlie, do you?
No.
You have to come to a conclusion as to how society is going to want to treat, and the present administration for that matter. The economics of the business may be fine, but that doesn't mean it has a great future. Zone 5.
I'm Harriet Morton from Seattle, Washington. I'm wondering, when you are considering an acquisition, how you look at the usefulness of the product.
In looking at any business?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we look at what the market says is the utility, and the market has voted very heavily for Dexter shoe, just to be an example. I don't know how many pairs of shoes they were turning out back in 1958 or thereabouts, but year after year, people have essentially voted for the utility of that product. There are 750 million or so 8-ounce servings of one product or another from the Coca-Cola company consumed every day around the world, and there are those of us who think the utility is very high. I can't make it through the day without a few. But there are other people that might rate it differently. But essentially, people are going to get thirsty, and if this is the way they take care of their thirst better than, and they prefer that to other forms, then I would rate the utility high of the product. But I think it's hard to argue with the market on that. I mean, some people may think that listening to a rock concert is not something of high utility. Other people may think it's terrific. And so we would judge that. I don't think we would come to an independent decision that there was some great utility residing in some product that had been available to the public for a long time, but the public had not endorsed in any way. Charlie?
Well, I think that's right, but I'd say averaged out, we're in a bunch of high utility products. I mean, nurses' shoes, work shoes, casual shoes. We don't have a lot of, Italian pumps.
Don't rule it out, Charlie. We may be here next year defending
Yeah,
it.
right. So I just say if you judge the existing portfolio as indicating what the future is likely to be like.
Well, certainly a lot of essentials were sold out of Borsheims yesterday.
Yes.
I hear my family clapping. Zone 6.
We have no question up here.
Okay, Zone 7.
Good morning, Mr. Berkshire,
Morning.
or Buffett.
I
name's Chris.
have a niece here who has a son named Berkshire, so
I'm Chris Blunk from Omaha. My first question is, in years past, we've had samples of various products. When are we going to have some Guinness?
some what now?
Guinness samples? My second question is, in light of the multiple disasters that have taken place in L.A., has that had any impact on the cats for Berkshire?
On our super cat business?
Yes.
The LA earthquake, which is originally, I believe the first estimate of insured damage was $1.5 billion, which struck us as kind of ludicrous, but has now escalated. The last official estimate, the one we use that's a trigger in our policies, I think is either $4.5 billion or $4.8 billion, but it's going to be higher than that. Our losses are fairly minor. If it gets to $8 billion of insured damage, that would trigger another policy or two. But I would say that the LA quake, which did considerably more damage, I think, than people would have anticipated from a 6.7 for various reasons having to do with how quakes operate. That quake is not going to turn out to be of any real. It's not the kind of super cat that a $15 or $20 billion hurricane which hit Florida or Long Island or New England would be. That's the kind of we could lose, or we could pay out $600 or $700 million in sort of a worst case super cat. Now our total premiums this year might be, say, $250 million or something in that area. So one super cat in the wrong place would produce, and there could be more than one, could produce, we'll say, a $400 million or thereabouts underwriting loss from that business. The LA quake is peanuts on that scale, but it wouldn't have taken a whole lot more in terms of numbers on the Richter scale if it happened to have an epicenter where it did and be of the type that it was, relatively shallow, that we could have had that sort of thing happen. I think that the insurance industry has vastly underestimated, maybe not now, but up till a few years ago, the full potential of what a super cat could do. But Hurricane Andrew and the LA quake may have been something of a wake-up call. They were far from a worst-case situation. A really big Type 5 hurricane on Long Island would end up leaving a lot of very major insurance companies in significant trouble. We define our losses. Essentially, $700 million sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but there are limits on our policies. That is not true of people that are just writing the basic homeowners or business. Those losses could go off the chart. There were certain companies in the LA quake that thought they had what they call a probable maximum loss for California quakes, and And the LA quake, which was far from the worst case you can imagine, turned out to far exceed those probable maximum losses. So I think the industry has had and may still have its head in the sand a little bit in terms of what can happen, either in terms of a quake in California or more probably in terms of a hurricane along the East Coast. So far this year, we're in reasonable shape, but that doesn't mean much because by far the larger exposure is in hurricanes, and essentially 50% of the hurricanes hit in September, and I think it's about 15% would be in August, close to 15% in October. So you have 80% roughly in those 3 months, and then there's a little tail on both sides. But that's when you find out whether you've had a good or bad year in the super cat business, basically. It's a business we like at the right rates because there are very few people that can afford to write it at the level that the underlying company, the reinsured companies, need it. And we are in a position, if the rates are right, to do significant business. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
Zone 1?
Clayton Riley from Jacksonville, Florida. This is a little different than all the other questions, but what were the 3 best books you read last year outside of the investment field? Well, even one will do.
I'll give you. I'll tout a book first that I've read, but that isn't available yet. But it will be in September. The woman who wrote it, I believe, is in the audience, and it's Ben Graham's biography, which will be available in September by Janet Lowe, and I've read it, and I think those of you who are interested in investments for sure will enjoy it. She's done a good job of capturing Ben. One of the books I enjoyed a lot was written also by a shareholder who's not here because he's being sworn in, I believe today or tomorrow, maybe tomorrow, as head of the Voice of America, and that's Jeff Cowan's book, which is on the People versus Clarence Darrow. It's the story of the Clarence Darrow trial for essentially jury bribery in Los Angeles back around 1912 when the McNamara brothers had bombed the LA Times. And it's a fascinating book. Jeff uncovered a lot of information that previous biographies of Darrow didn't have. I think you'd enjoy that. Charlie? Again?
Well, I very much enjoyed Connie Bruck's biography, Master of the Game, which was a biography of Steve Ross, who headed Warner and later was co-chairman of Time Warner.
Yeah, a little more than co-chairman.
Yeah, and she's a very insightful writer, and it's a very interesting story. I am rereading a book I really like, which is Van Dorn's biography of Benjamin Franklin, which came out in 1952. And I'd almost forgotten how good a book it was. And that's available in paperback everywhere. And we've never had anybody quite like Franklin in this country. Never again.
He believed in compound interest, too, incidentally, as you may remember. We set up those 2 little funds, one in Philadelphia and one in Boston.
Right.
Yeah, to demonstrate the advantages of compound interest. I think that's the part Charlie's rereading. Zone 2?
Thank you for teaching so much to all of us about business. My name is Mike Assail from New York City. You mentioned earlier that Berkshire's shoe business was great, but that other shoe businesses were not so good. What are the uncertainties of the global brand leaders that the Berkshire seems to like? They like Coke and Gillette. The global brand leaders in the shoe business being Nike and Reebok. What are their uncertainties in terms of long-term competitive advantage, business economics, consumer behavior, and the other risk factors that you mentioned in the annual report this year? Thank you.
So you're really asking about the future prospects of Nike and Reebok? Yeah, I don't know that much about those businesses. We do have one person in this audience at least who owns a lot of Reebok, but I'm not expressing a negative view in any way on that. I don't understand I don't understand their competitive position and the likelihood of permanence of their competitive position over a 10 or 20-year period, as well as I think I understand the position of Brown and Dexter. That doesn't mean I think that it's inferior. It doesn't mean that I think that we've got better businesses or anything. I think we've got very good businesses, but I haven't done the work, and I'm not sure if I did the work I would understand them. I think they are harder to understand, frankly, and to develop a fix on than our kinds. But they may be easier for other people who just have a better insight into that kind of business. Some businesses are a lot easier to understand than others. And Charlie and I don't like difficult problems. I mean, if something is hard to figure, we'd rather multiply by 3 than by pi. I mean, it's just easier for us. Charlie,
Well, that is such an obvious point, and yet so many people think if they just hire somebody with the appropriate labels, they can do something very difficult. That is one of the most dangerous ideas a human being can have. All kinds of things just intrinsically create problems. The other day I was dealing with a problem, and I said, it's a new building. And I said, this thing has 3 things I've learned to fear: an architect, a contractor, and a hill. And if you go at life like that, I think you at least make fewer mistakes than people who think they can do anything by just hiring somebody with a label.
Excuse me, go ahead, sir.
You don't have to hire out your thinking if you keep it simple.
You don't have to do, we've said this before, but you don't have to do exceptional things to get exceptional results. And some people think that if you jump over a 7-foot bar, that the ribbon they pin on you is going to be worth more money than if you step over a 1-foot bar. And it just isn't true in the investment world at all. So you can do very ordinary things. I mean, what is complicated about this? But, we're $3 billion pre-tax better off than we were a few years ago because of it. There's nothing that I know about that product or its distribution system, its finances, or anything that really hundreds of thousands or millions of people aren't capable of, that they don't already know. They just don't do anything about it. And similarly, if you get into some complicated business, you can get a report that's 1,000 pages thick, and you got PhDs working on it, but it doesn't mean anything. What you've got is a report, but you won't understand that business, what it's going to look like in 10 or 15 years. The big thing to do is avoid being wrong.
There's some things that are so intrinsically dangerous. Another of my heroes is Mark Twain, who looked at the promoters of his day, and he said, a mine is a hole in the ground owned by a liar. And that's the way I've come to look at projections. I mean, basically, I can remember Warren and I were offered $2 million worth of projections once in the course of buying a business, and the book was this thick. And
for nothing.
And we were given it for nothing, and we wouldn't open it.
We'd almost pay $2 million not to look at it. I mean, it's ridiculous. I do not understand why any buyer of a business looks at a bunch of projections put together by a seller or
his agent.
Or his agent. I mean, you can almost say that it's naive to think that has any utility whatsoever. We just are not interested. If we don't have some idea ourselves of what we think the future is, to sit there and listen to some other guy who's trying to sell us the business or get a commission on it, tell us what the future is going to be, like I say, it's very naive.
Yeah, and 5 years out.
Yeah. We had a line in the report one time, don't ask the barber whether you need a haircut. And it's quite applicable to projections by sellers of businesses. Zone 3.
Mr. Buffett, Greg Ulrich from Washington, D.C. In the last year, United Airlines and Northwest have resolved some of their financial problems by moving ownership over to the employees. With U.S. Air's current positions, problems, what do you see as occurring with U.S. Air? And do you see any movement toward employee ownership, and how will that affect Berkshire's interest in the company?
Well, U.S. Air has a cost structure which is non-viable in today's airline business. Now, that in an important way involves its labor costs, but it involves other things too. But it certainly involves its labor costs, and they've stated this publicly, and I think, and they are talking with their unions about it, and they're talking with other people about other parts of their cost structure. And I think you'll just see what unfolds in the next relatively few months, because there isn't any question that the cost structure is out of line. I think the cost structure could be brought into line, but whether it will be brought into line or not is another question. And looking backwards, the answer is not to get into businesses that need to solve problems like that. But that was a mistake I made, and I think in Seth Schofield, you've got a manager who understands that business extremely well, who probably is as, in my view anyway, is as well regarded and trusted by people who are going to have to make changes as anyone could be in that position. But that may not be enough. I mean, there's enormous tensions when you need to take hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars out of the cost structure of any business, and when you need cooperative action by various groups, each one of which feels that maybe they're having to give a little more than some other group, and understandably feels that way. That is an enormously tough negotiating job. I think Seth is as well equipped for that as anyone, but I would not want to. I cannot predict the outcome. Charlie?
Well, if I were a union leader, I would give Seth whatever he wants, because he's not the kind of a fellow who would ask for more than he needs. And it's perfectly obvious that's the correct decision on the labor side, but whether the obvious will be done or not is in the lap of the gods.
That's a lot of people with a lot of different motivations, and those are really tough questions. I mean, Charlie and I have been involved with that sort of thing a few times, and frequently it works out, but it's not preordained. Zone 4.
My name is Sheldon Zizek from Chicago, Illinois. I have two questions. The first one is concerning Mr. Munger. We know what Mr. Buffett's retirement plans are. I was wondering what your plans for the future concerning Berkshire are.
I've always preferred the system of retirement where you can't quite tell from observing from the outside whether the man is working or retired.
He does it well, too.
A problem in many businesses, particularly the more bureaucratic ones, is that your employees retire, but they don't tell you. And
I think I can speak for Charlie on this. Charlie and I are not in any hurry to retire. He's trying to outlast me, actually.
Thank you. My second question is, I was just curious why you sold a portion of Cap Cities.
We thought that it was a good idea for Cap Cities to have a tender offer. They had cash that we thought that they could not use they were not likely to be able to use in a better way than repurchasing their own shares, because they do have some very good businesses. They and we felt that a tender offer would not be successful in terms of attracting a number of shares unless Berkshire were tendering. We felt the price was reasonable to tender at. It turned out that the business was getting stronger during that period, and various things were happening in media. So there were only 100,000 shares or so tendered outside of our million. That isn't necessarily what we thought was going to happen going in, but that is what happened. It's acceptable to us, but that doesn't mean that it was the desired outcome. We would not have tendered all of our shares or anything of the sort. We wanted to remain a substantial shareholder of Cap Cities. Most of the time we've favored Cap Cities buying in its stock, and it's bought in a fair amount of stock since the ABC merger took place started in 1986. Zone 5.
Good morning. My name is Matt Vogt. I'm from Omaha. Last year's meeting, you made reference to structured settlements. I was wondering, how is that business progressing for you?
The question's about the structured settlement business, which is a business in which Berkshire guarantees, in effect, an annuity to some claimant of another, usually of another insurance company, who has suffered an injury, and instead of getting a lump sum now, wants to get a stream of payments over many years in the future, sometimes going out 75 years. We have set up a life company to do that business. We formerly did it all through our property casualty companies. And we have done some business, but it's not been a big business yet. And it may never be a big business. It's a perfectly satisfactory business, but it's not an important item at present in the analysis of Berkshire's value. Are you having a problem with sound out there on this or not? Just no? Zone 6.
My name is David Samra. I'm from San Francisco, California. In your annual report, I noticed you mentioned Wrigley as being a company that has worldwide dominance, somewhat like Coca-Cola and Gillette, and was curious to know if you had looked at the company in any detail, and if so, whether or not, if you decided not to invest, what were the reasons why?
Well, we wouldn't want to comment on a company like that, because we might or might not be buying it, we might or might not be selling it, and we might or might not buy or sell it in the future. And since it falls under that narrow definition of things that we don't talk about, it's a good illustration of a company that has a high market share worldwide. But you can understand the Wrigley company just as well as I can. I have no insights into the Wrigley company that you wouldn't have, and I wouldn't want to go beyond that in giving you our evaluation of the company. Hate to disappoint you on those, but on specific securities, we are not too forthcoming sometimes. Charlie?
I'm good at not being forthcoming.
Zone 7.
Mr. Buffett, Kathleen Ambrose from Omaha. I have a question regarding global diversification, just in general. What do you look for in a company? And if so, as far as Europe or Latin America, if you'd like to be specific.
Yeah. The question is about global diversification. All we want to be in is businesses that we understand, run by people that we like, and priced attractively compared to the future prospects. So there is no specific desire to either be in the rest of Europe or the rest of the world or Far East, or to avoid it. It's simply a factor that it's not a big factor. There may be more chances for growth in some countries. 80% of Coca-Cola's earnings, roughly, will come from outside the United States. 80% of Guinness's earnings will come from outside the United States, but they're domiciled outside the United States, whereas Coca-Cola is domiciled here. Certainly, in many cases, there are markets outside the United States that have way better prospects for growth than the U.S. market would have, but they probably have some other risks to them that this market may not have. But we like the international prospects, obviously, of a company like Coke. We like the international prospects of a company like Gillette. Gillette earns 70% of its money outside this country. So if you look on a look-through basis, Coke, we might this year get something like $150 million of earnings indirectly for Berkshire's interest from the rest of the world just through Coca-Cola alone. But we don't make any specific, we don't think in terms of, I like this region so I want to be there or something of the sort. It's something that's specific to the companies we were looking at, and then we'll try to evaluate that. Coke is expanding in China. Well, I think, I forget what they showed last year, maybe 38% growth or something like that in cases. It's nice to have markets like that are relatively untapped. Actually, Gillette is expanding in China in a big way, and the Chinese don't shave as often, and more of them are what they call dry shavers than wet shavers there, which is electric shavers. But maybe we could stick something into Coke that would come. Maybe a little synergy at Berkshire finally. Who knows? Buildings, a lot of that is not insured. But you get interesting questions on this. Usually we insure an event. But what's an event? If you go back to the riots that occurred after Martin Luther King was shot, you had riots in dozens of cities. Is that one event, or is that a multiple number of events? I mean, it started by different people, but maybe arising from a common cause. Some of those things aren't actually very well defined, even after hundreds of years of insurance law and custom, the experience of that. But I would say that rioting is very unlikely to get to a level that triggers our policy. The big risks we face are quake and hurricanes, and hurricanes are more significant risk than quake. They call them typhoons in the Pacific Ocean. But floods, tremendous damage from floods last year. But basically, there's not a lot of private flood insurance bought, so the insured losses do not get large. Just watch the Weather Channel. Zone 2.
Diane West from Corona Del Mar, California. I know, Mr. Buffett, that you've said that you don't read what other people say about the market or the economy, but do either you or Charlie have an opinion about how you think things are going to go? Are you bullish or bearish?
You may have trouble believing this, but Charlie and I never have an opinion about the market because it wouldn't be any good, and it might interfere with the opinions we have that are good. If we're right about a business, if we think a business is attractive, it would be very foolish for us to not take action on that because we thought something about what the market was going to do or anything of that sort, because we just don't know. And to give up something that you do know and that is profitable for something that you don't know and won't know because of that, it doesn't make any sense to us, and it doesn't really make any difference to us. I mean, I bought my first stock, I think, in probably April of 1942 when I was 11. And since then, I mean, actually World War II didn't look so good at that time. I mean, the prospects, they really didn't. I mean, we were not doing well in the Pacific, and I'm not sure I calculated that into my purchase of my 3 shares. But I mean, just think of all the things that have happened since then, atomic weapons and major wars and presidents resigning and all kinds of things, massive inflation at certain times. To give up what you're doing well because of guesses about what's going to happen in some macro way just doesn't make any sense to us. The best thing that can happen from Berkshire's standpoint, we don't wish this on anybody, but over time is to have markets that go down a tremendous amount. I mean, we are going to be buyers of things over time. Now, if you're going to be buyers of groceries over time, you like grocery prices to go down. If you're going to be buying cars over time, you like car prices to go down. We buy businesses. We buy pieces of businesses, stocks. And we're going to be much better off if we can buy those things at an attractive price than if we can't. So we don't have any fear at all. I mean, what we fear is an irrational bull market that's sustained for some long period of time. You, as shareholders of Berkshire, unless you own your shares on borrowed money or are going to sell them in a very short period of time, are better off if stocks get cheaper, because it means that we can be doing more intelligent things on your behalf than would be the case otherwise. But we have no idea and we wouldn't care what anybody thought about it. I mean, most of all ourselves. I mean, Charlie, do you have any?
No, I think if you're agnostic about those macro factors and therefore devote all your time to thinking about the individual businesses and the individual opportunities, it's a way more efficient way to behave, at least with our particular talents and lacks thereof.
If you write about the businesses, you'll end up doing fine. We don't know, and we don't think about when something will happen. We think about what will happen. It's not so difficult to figure out what will happen. It's impossible in our view to figure out when it will happen. So we focus on what will happen. This company in 1890 or thereabouts, the whole company sold for $2,000. It's got a market value now of about 50-odd billion. You know. Somebody could have said to the fellow who was buying this in 1890, you know, you're going to have a couple of great world wars, and you know, and you'll have the panic of 1907. All these things will happen, and wouldn't it be a better idea to wait? You know? We can't afford that mistake, basically. Yeah. Zone 3.
Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, last year, I'm Tim Medley from Jackson, Mississippi. Last year, the question was asked about your preference for purchasing entire businesses versus parts of public companies. You mentioned you preferred to buy private businesses because of the tax advantages and your attraction to the people in those businesses. Are you finding today that there are better purchases within the private market versus in the public securities markets?
Well, I would answer that no. We very seldom find something to buy on a negotiated basis for an entire business. We have certain size requirements, big limiting factors. It has to be something we can understand. I mean, that eliminates 95% of the businesses, and we don't pay any attention to them, but we get lots of proposals for things that are just totally outside the boundaries of what we've already said we're interested in. We prefer to buy entire businesses or 80% or greater interest in businesses, partly for the tax reasons you mentioned, and frankly, we like it better. It's the kind of business we would like to build if we had our absolute druthers on it. Counter to that is we can usually get more for our money in wonderful businesses in terms of buying little pieces of them in the market, because the market is far more inefficient in pricing businesses than is the negotiated market. You're not going to buy any bargains, and I mean you shouldn't even approach the idea of buying a bargain in a negotiated purchase. You want to buy it from people who are going to run it for you. You want to buy it from people who are intelligent enough to price their business properly, and they are. I mean, that's the way things are. The market does not do that. The market, in the stock market, you get a chance to buy businesses at foolish prices. And that is why we end up with a lot of money in marketable securities. If we absolutely had our choice, we would own a group of, we would own 3 times the number of businesses we own outright. We're unlikely to get that opportunity over time, but periodically we'll get the chance to find something that fits our tests. And in between, we will, when the market offers us the right prices, we will buy more, either businesses we already own pieces of, or we'll buy 1 or 2 new ones. Something's usually going on. There are tax advantages to owning all of them, but that's more than offset by the fact that you'll never get a chance to buy you'll never get a chance to buy the whole Coca-Cola company or the whole Gillette company. The businesses like that, the sensational businesses, are just not available. Sometimes you get a chance to make a sensible purchase in the market of such businesses. Charlie?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And if you stop to think about it, if 100% of a business is for sale, you've got the average corporate buyer is being run by people who have the mindset of people buying with somebody else's money, and we have the mindset of people buying with our own money. And there's also a class of buyers for 100% of businesses who are basically able and shrewd financial promoters. I'm talking about the leveraged buyout funds and so on. And those people tend to have the upside but not the downside in the private arrangements they've made with their investors. And naturally, they tend to be somewhat optimistic. And so we have formidable competition when we try and buy 100% of businesses.
Most managers are better off in terms of their personal equation if they're running something larger. Now, they're also better off if they're running something larger and more profitable. But the first condition alone will usually leave them better off. We're only better off if we're running something that's more profitable. We also like it if it's larger too. But our equation actually, our personal equation is actually different than a great many managers in that respect. Even if that didn't operate, I think most managers psychically would enjoy running something larger. And if you can pay for it with other people's money, I mean, that gets pretty attractive. You know, how much would and let's just say you're a baseball fan. Well, how much would you pay to own whatever your hometown, the Yankees? You might pay more if you were writing a check on someone else's bank account than if you were writing it on your own. It's been known to happen. And in corporate America, animal spirits are there, and those are our competitors on buying entire businesses. In terms of buying securities, most managers don't even think about it. It's very interesting to me because they'll say that they'll have somebody else manage their money in terms of a portfolio of securities. Well, all that is a portfolio of businesses. And I'll say, well, why don't you pick out your own portfolio? Well, they'll say, that's much too difficult. And then some guy will come along with some business that they never heard of a week before and give them some figures and a few projections, and the guy thinks he knows enough to buy that business. It's very puzzling to me sometimes. Zone 4. Could you hold it a little closer to you? I can't hear too well. It's hard to hear. Is the mic on there?
It's on.
Ah, okay. I can hear that fine.
Let's try it one more time. Dan Rader, San Mateo, California. This is a question for Mr. Munger. In your most recent letter to shareholders in Wesco's annual report, you calculated the intrinsic value of Wesco at about $100 per share and compared that to the then current market price of Wesco of about $130 per share. In the same letter, you stated that it was unclear whether at then current market prices Berkshire or Wesco presented a better value to prospective purchasers. In light of that, would you compare the intrinsic value of Berkshire to its current market price?
Well, the answer to that is no. Berkshire has never calculated intrinsic value per share and reported it to the shareholders, and Wesco never did before this year. we changed our mind at Wesco because we really thought some of the buyers had gone a little crazy, and a lot of things were being said to prospective shareholders that, in our opinion, were unwise. And we don't really like attracting, even though we've had nothing to do with it, we don't like attracting people in at high prices that may not be wise. So we departed from our long precedent, and we did, in the Wesco report, make an estimate of intrinsic value per share. But we're not changing the general policy. That was just a one-time quirk.
Well, and also I think it's true that the Wesco intrinsic value per share can be estimated by anyone within fairly close limits. It just isn't that complicated because there aren't a number of businesses there that have values different than carrying values, or where they are, they're all footnoted in terms of numbers. So it'd be almost impossible to come up with numbers that are significantly different than the number Charlie put in there. Berkshire has assets that, number one of which would be the insurance business, that it's clear have very significant excess values, but one person might estimate those at maybe 3 times what somebody else would estimate them at. That's less true of our other businesses, but it's still true in a way, so that Berkshire's range would be somewhat greater. And as Charlie, we don't want to disappoint people. We also don't want to disappoint ourselves. But we have our own yardsticks for what we think is doable. We try to convey that as well as we can to the people who are partners in the business. And I think that we saw some things being published about Wesco that simply might have led to, probably did lead to some expectations that simply weren't consonant with our own personal expectations, and that leaves us uncomfortable. Zone 5.
Hello, my name is Charles Pyle from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'd like to ask you to expound on your view of risk in the financial world, and I ask that against the background of what appear to be a number of inconsistencies between your view of risk and the conventional view of risk. I mentioned that in a recent article you pointed out an inconsistency in the use of beta as a measure of risk, which is a common standard, and I mentioned that derivatives are dangerous, and yet you feel comfortable playing in derivatives through Salomon Brothers, and betting on hurricanes is dangerous, and yet you feel comfortable playing with hurricanes through insurance companies. So it appears that you have some view of risk that's inconsistent with what would appear on the face of it to be the conventional view of risk.
Well, we do define risk as the possibility of harm or injury, and in that respect, we think it's inextricably wound up in your time horizon for holding an asset. I mean, if your risk is that if you intend to buy XYZ Corporation at 11:30 this morning and sell it out before the close today, I mean, that is, in our view, that is a very risky transaction, because we think 50% of the time you're going to suffer some harm or injury. If you have a time horizon on a business, we think the risk of buying something like Coca-Cola at the price we bought it at a few years ago is essentially so close to nil in terms of our prospective holding period. But if you ask me the risk of buying Coca-Cola this morning and you're going to sell it tomorrow morning, I say that's a very risky transaction. Now, as I pointed out in the annual report, it became very fashionable in the academic world, and then that spilled over into the financial markets, to define risk in terms of volatility, of which beta became a measure. But that is no measure of risk. The risk in terms of our supercat business is not that we lose money in any given year. We know we're going to lose money in some given day, that is for certain, and we're extremely likely to lose money in a given year. Our time horizon of writing that business, would be at least a decade, and we think the probability of losing money over a decade is low. So we feel that in terms of our horizon of investment, that is not a risky business, and it's a whole lot less risky than writing something that's much more predictable. Interesting thing is that using conventional measures of risk, something whose return varies from year to year between plus 20% and plus 80% is riskier as defined than something whose return is 5% a year every year. We just think the financial world has gone haywire in terms of measures of risk. We look at what we do. We are perfectly willing to lose money on a given transaction, arbitrage being an example, any given insurance policy being another example. We are perfectly willing to lose money on any given transaction. We are not willing to enter into transactions in which we think the probability of doing a number of mutually independent events but of a similar type has an expectancy of loss. And we hope that we are entering into our transactions where our calculations of those probabilities have validity. And to do so, we try to narrow it down. There are a whole bunch of things we just won't do because we don't think we can write the equation on them. But we basically, Charlie and I, by nature, are pretty risk averse, but we are very willing to enter into transactions. If we knew it was an honest coin and someone wanted to give us 7 to 5 or something of the sort on one flip, how much of Berkshire's net worth would we put on that flip? Well, it would sound like a big number to you. It would not be a huge percentage of the net worth, but it would be a significant number. We will do things when probabilities favor us. Charlie?
Yeah, I would say we try and think like Fermat and Pascal as if they'd never heard of modern finance theory. I really think that a lot of modern finance theory can only be described as disgusting.
Zone 6?
Good morning. I'm Paul Miller from Kansas City, Missouri. I've got 2 questions. First, not too long ago, I believe it was Fortune magazine that ran an article regarding personal tax rates. And at the risk of misquoting you, my recollection is that you favored higher personal rates even higher than those proposed by those in Washington. The second question is, I've heard Berkshire Hathaway referred to as nothing more than a high-priced rich man's mutual fund. Would you care to comment on that also?
Well, on tax rates, if you ask me what I personally favor, I personally favor a steeply progressive consumption tax. That has a little more attention being paid to it now, although the steeply progressive might be modified by most of the advocates of the consumption tax, maybe to mildly progressive or something of the sort. There's a non-Domenici proposal along that line, and there are other people that are talking about it more. It may be examined by the new Kerry Danforth Commission, of which we've got a member in the audience. But I believe in, one way or another, I believe in progressive taxes. And so I am not shocked in terms of my own situation, and I don't think Charlie is particularly, about having a progressive income tax, although, like I say, I think society would run better over time if it were a progressive consumption tax instead. Do you want to comment on the tax situation, Charlie?
Well, I think there is a point at which income taxes become quite counterproductive if the progression is too high. But I don't think we're there yet.
We think, at least I think, I'm extraordinarily well treated by the society. I think most people with high incomes are. I think if you transported most of them to Bangladesh or Peru or something, they would find out how much of it is them and how much is the society. And I think there's nothing better than a market system in terms of motivating people and in terms of producing the goods and services that the society wants. But I do think it gets a little out of whack in terms of what the productivity maybe of an outstanding teacher compared to somebody who is good at figuring out the intrinsic value of businesses. I don't have a better system on the income side, but I think society should figure out some way to make those who are particularly blessed, in a sense, to have talents that get paid off enormously in a market system, to give back a fair amount of that to the society that produces that. The question about Berkshire being I think was it Rich Man's Mutual Fund or something like that. We don't look at it that way at all. We look at it as a collection of businesses, and ideally, we would own all of those businesses. So it's to the extent that a mutual fund owns stock in a lot of companies and diversifies among businesses, and we try to own a lot of businesses ourselves. I guess that's true, but I guess you could say the same thing of General Electric or an operation like that. We are more prone to buy pieces of businesses than the typical manager, but we are trying to do, in a sense, the same thing Jack Welch is trying to do at General Electric, which is try to own a number of first-class businesses. He gets to put the imprint of his own management, which I think is very good, on those businesses, and we are more hands-off both in the businesses we own outright and in the ones we own pieces of. But we're going at it the same way, and General Electric has been very successful under Jack's leadership in doing it his way. We think in terms of what we bring to the game and the problems of putting money to work all the time that our own system is, will work best for us. Charlie?
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that.